on?
We are live.
All right.
And 0 viewers, so it's just
viewers.
You and me.
Hi, how's it going?
Well, we'll wait a minute to see if anyone joins us. And if no one joins us, we'll get started.
Sounds like a plan. All right.
Well, why don't I start by getting our axes drawn here.
Right.
So I think I'm going to draw our indifference map over here, and then we're going to have our demand curve over here. So then we can check out what this looks like. Make sure that we can see everything. So we've got quantity of apples. That looks like a mess. So I'm going to erase that. Is this too blurry?
It's a little blurry. Yeah.
Let's see if we can focus that. It's a little better?
It's a little better, but yeah, somehow it's blurry up, but not so blurry.
Well, maybe that looks okay, because at least it looks
fine.
I think it looks okay. All right.
All right, we're set up.
So before we talk about any prices or any quantities, maybe Fernando, you could walk us through indifference curves and where indifference curves comes from. Because one of the things that I've noticed in the quizzes is that some indifference curve questions have been missed. So I'm going to let Professor Fernando talk a little bit about indifference curves.
All right, so the first thing that is very important is to understand, since we're going to be drawing indifference curves, what a bundle is. And so when you look at this graph right here, what you have to notice is that it has on the x-axis the quantity of apples, and on the y-axis it has, today we're going to use the quantity of cherries. And so if a person goes to the supermarket and wants to buy apples and cherries and decides to buy a certain amount of apples and a certain amount of cherries, then it's going to show up like this. Let's say this is, what would be a good number since we're in a
12 is 12. Good. 12,
right, so
and then maybe 12.
If you buy 12 apples and I don't know, four little boxes of cherries, what you can see is that if you mark 12 on the x-axis and you mark 4 on the y-axis and you bring them together, this point will mark this idea that you went to the supermarket and bought 12 apples and 4 cherries. And then when it comes to preferences, what we're going to try to decide here is, well, with 12 apples and 4 cherries, what other bundles make you indifferent to 12 and 4? Maybe if you sacrifice 6 apples and get 4 more boxes of cherries, you're indifferent. So let's go from 4 to 8. You've sacrificed 6 apples, so you move in this direction to 6, but you gained 4 more boxes of cherries, and you're indifferent. And so what we're going to say is that this bundle makes this person indifferent to this one. On the other hand, you might want to sacrifice some cherries. So maybe if you sacrifice 2 boxes of cherries, now you're left with only 2, which we mark here, and I give you, I don't know, let's say 12 more apples. So you go all the way up to 24. You're also indifferent. And so at this bundle that has 24 and 2, you're indifferent to this bundle that has 12 and 4, and to this one that has 6 and 8. And so now we have 3 different bundles that make this consumer indifferent. And if you think about it, you can repeat this over and over again until you find every possible bundle that makes this person indifferent to the original one that had 12 and 4. And so if we repeat this process, what we're going to find out is that all these bundles that you see here make this person indifferent. And so I'm going to use another color just to make it look nice. And here you have an indifference curve, which again shows all possible bundles that keep this consumer indifferent to the original bundle of 12 and 4. All right, this is one indifference curve. Can we draw other indifference curves? The answer is yes. Why? Because maybe if we give this person 24 apples and 8 boxes of cherries, this person is going to be better off than at 12 and 4. Now the person has more apples and more cherries. So naturally, this person is going to be better off. So at this bundle, or this bundle should be on a higher indifference curve. Can we find other bundles that make this person indifferent to 24 and 8? Yes. And again, if we repeat the process that we repeated here, we could eventually find out that, let's say, all these bundles make the person indifferent to 24 and 8. And so you see we've created one indifference curve, then we create another one, and we can create as many indifference curves as we want. That's the key here. We can create as many indifference curves as we want, and more importantly, if you pick just one bundle, there's only going to be one indifference curve that goes through that bundle. So you can't cross these indifference curves. It wouldn't make any sense. So as you draw more and more indifference curves, you're capturing with more and more precision the preferences of this individual. And I could go on forever, but I won't. I'll just leave it at that. Now we have an indifference map that gives us a bunch of information about this person's preferences. All right.
All right. Well, I think we can use Fernando's indifference map here to answer some more questions about what our consumers might do if we give them some constraints, and constraints in the form of prices and income. Now, let's suppose as consumers me, I actually really enjoy apples and cherries.
So do I.
And, who doesn't? Apples and cherries. And let's suppose I have income, which will abbreviate M. I have income of $24. We're going to say that the price of an apple is $1, I think. Yeah, $1. And the price of a box of cherries, or maybe a little cup of cherries, is going to be $3. Now, with this information here and this indifference map that Professor Fernando created for us, we can actually represent the optimal consumption bundle for me. So if I chose to spend all of my $24 on apples, the best I can do, the price of apples is $1, is consume 24 apples. If I choose to spend all of my income on cherries, I can only buy 8 boxes of cherries, because 8 times $3 is $24. That's all of my income. So 24, oh, we got this point right there. And I can also afford to spend, let's say, half of my income on apples, or spend half of my income on apples. That's 12 apples. And that leaves me $12 that I can spend on 4 boxes of cherries. Well, lucky us. That's one of these points too. And we could keep going, finding other possible combinations, or we can construct a straight line running through.
We're going to have to change the 24, but that's okay.
All these points.
About the straight line.
Yeah. Well, it turns out 24 is over here.
Or maybe the 8 was wrong. That's what happens when you do
a live session.
Live session.
And we'll try to make that straight, because this would be a straight line. And in the videos, we talked about how we could find the slope of this straight line. Now, there's only one point that's going to make me as happy as I could possibly be. And that point is represented.
Let me fix you this.
Oh, I did it wrong, didn't I?
No, that's fine.
No, there it is. Now it's wrong.
No, it's good.
No. There's only one point that makes me as happy as I could possibly be. So let's take a look again at this indifference map that Fernando's created for me. I would like to be on the highest indifference curve possible. You could never, let's suppose I could never be happy. I'll never be satisfied, ever. I'll never be satisfied. I'll always want to be on a higher and higher indifference curve, but I'm constrained by my income and the fact that I have to pay for apples and cherries. And so I can find the highest possible indifference curve by looking at this map right here. And that, help me out here,
Happens to be.
happens to be right
We got
here.
lucky. On purpose, we got lucky.
Right here.
At 12 and 4.
At 12 and 4.
But what matters here, and that some people might get lost, is that it's not that you have to pick between this indifference curve or this one, which are the only ones that we see that touch the budget line. There's more indifference curves. We just haven't drawn them. Like, I can draw another indifference curve here. That will also not be an indifference curve you want to be on, because you can access this indifference curve right here by picking 12 and 4. And I can just continue drawing. And I don't want to ruin this graph that took me so long, but I'll do one more. I can just continue drawing indifference curves. And every time I draw an indifference curve that touches the budget line, it won't be as high as this one. And every time I draw an indifference curve that's higher than this one, it won't touch the budget line. All right, I'm done. No more indifference curves. The point I'm trying to make is that indeed what Professor Kara just showed us is the highest indifference curve, this one. Not because it's the highest, but it's the highest that you can achieve with $24 if the price of apples is $1 per unit and the price of cherries is $3 per box. All right, so that's how you solve these problems. And once we've solved this problem once, we can solve this problem again and again, and we can start learning what the demand curve of this individual is going to look like.
So do you think now's a good time to maybe sketch one in? Let's draw a demand curve. So I'm going to use black for the axes again.
I say just draw the axes and the one point that we have so far.
Just draw the axes and the 1 point. Yeah, we're going to just put quantity. We need to derive this demand curve. Quantity of apples. And we're going to have price of apples.
All right, so what's the only thing that we have so far?
The only thing that we have so far is we have price of apples is $1.
$1.
Let's put $1 right here.
We're going to do 150 and 2, so just leave room for that. That looks good.
Yeah, that looks good.
And
we have, if the price of apples is $1, we can't see the price of cherries here, but it's implicitly there. Because we made an assumption about the price of cherries, and we can't see income here, but we made an assumption about income too. So if our income is 24, the price of cherries is 3, the price of apples is 1, we choose to consume 12. We have 1 point on our demand.
that's all we have, 1 point. And remember, this is very important. We cannot change the price of cherries. We cannot change the income if we're going to try to find the demand curve. Because the demand curve, what it's showing is how the price of apples relates to the quantity demanded of apples when everything else stays the same. As soon as you move either income or the price of cherries, that demand curve is going to move as well. So, all right, let's try to get another point. How are we going to get another point? Well, we need to move the price of apples, but when we move the price of apples, it's going to move the budget line, not the preferences. Preferences are personal and have nothing to do with the scarcity constraint, which is the budget line. It's going to move the budget line, and then we're going to see what this person would do at a different price. So let's do that.
All right, let's pick a new price. Let's try, we have price $1. Let's try, I like to use green here.
Yeah.
Green for prices. We're going to say PA prime, our new price, is going to be $1.50. $1.50. So if an apple costs $1.50, and this is me again, I have $24, so we haven't changed that. If the price of apples costs $1.50, if I spend all of my income,
Do we have that? I don't know that we have that.
I think it's 18.
Is it 18? I don't know. 18 plus 9.
So that's half again.
Yeah. No, it's not.
All right. Well, live session. We have one viewer. You are watching us now. This is what happens when you try to do arithmetic in your head when the world is watching. It's 16.
16. Yep.
16,
Right.
not
That
18.
makes
Yeah,
sense.
that would have been catastrophic. I don't know that we could have recovered from that. Okay,
All right.
so we have now, if the price is $1.50 and I spend all of my income on apples, I can only afford 16.
16 plus 8, 24. We're good.
Yep. 16 plus 8, 24. All right.
Now, do you want to use the green so that?
Yep, use the green. Now, if I choose to spend all of my income on cherries, then nothing changes, right? I can still consume at this point here. And I can afford all points in between. So I'm going to draw a straight line, as straight as I possibly can. Here. Uh-oh, we didn't get as lucky this time, Fernando.
No, no worries.
So we're going to have to find
All right.
the
Now,
highest.
this is important, okay? We're going to try to find the highest indifference curve. But remember, it looks like this is the highest indifference curve you can achieve. But remember, you can always draw more indifference curves in between any two indifference curves. And so this is not the highest indifference curve you can achieve because there's 2 points that make this person indifferent but are also on the same budget line. So, can this person achieve a higher indifference curve than at this bundle or this bundle? Well, the answer is yes, because this person could maybe pick a bundle like this one. Let's say it's this one, which has 6 apples, so that we get a nice result. And this one will be on an even higher indifference curve. I'm not going to draw this very
It's there, though.
long, but it's there, and it continues. I just don't want to ruin the graph. And so the highest indifference curve that this person can achieve is an indifference curve where the bundle is 6
And it turns out
apples and whatever that
5
is. Is it 5?
boxes of cherries.
All right, beautiful.
So 6
Got lucky
times,
there.
yep, six times $1.50 is, that is spending $9
On apples.
on apples. That leaves us $15 left, and we spend $15 on
Beautiful.
cherries. We
Very lucky.
really couldn't have done that better had we planned it. All right,
All right.
so what we
And
have
a new
here,
point.
we have a new point. So we can go to our demand curve, and we can say if the price of apples is $1.50 and absolutely nothing else changes, my income is the same, the price of,
Can I
Yes.
do something
Yeah,
here?
yeah, you're gonna- that's okay.
We need to be halfway
We
up.
need to be halfway, otherwise it's not going to work. There we go.
Okay. Very nitpicky. Sorry.
That's good, because then our pictures work.
Yeah.
Nothing else has changed. Income's still 24, price of cherries is still 3, and implicitly we've just assumed that it's still me and I still like apples and cherries the same amount. So now we have another point.
Demand of 6
6,
at a price of 150.
a price of 150. Here we go. So this, we have 2 points on our demand curve. And should we do another one?
Let's do another one.
Let's do another one.
Let's keep going. See
Should
what
we
happens.
Should we do a price decline?
We could do a price decline. It's gonna go a little bit off our graph, but it doesn't matter.
Let's do a price decline. So should we do 75 cents?
No, let's do 50 cents and go way off the graph.
Let's do 50 cents and go way off the graph. Okay. So if we were going to the school of Fernando, it would be right here.
Right there.
All the way
I'll take
off.
the green. I'll draw this one.
All right. Fernando's got this.
All right. So 50 cents per apple. What happens? Before you could afford only 24. Now you can afford 48. Was it here that we marked it? Okay.
Yep.
48. But what about cherries? Well, the price hasn't changed, so you can still afford up to 8 boxes of cherries. So now we have to draw the budget line between 0.8 and 48 and 0 and see what happens.
Oh.
It's not that bad.
No, that looks pretty good.
All right, and so just to make things simple, let's assume that we hit maximum or the highest indifference curve right here at 24. So I'm going to cheat a little bit. Bring it down like that.
You're appealing to the thick dots here.
Yes. Well, let me do it like this. There. Now we're good. All right, so we've selected a bundle that has 24 apples when the apples are now 50 cents each. So 24 apples at 50 cents each gives us $12 that we just spent on apples. And we have 24, which means that we still have $12 left to buy cherries, which means that if this is going to be on the budget line, then this is, and I'm going to cheat again.
4, I think.
Is it? Cheat again, and I'm going to say that this is, oops.
You like the other one's good.
The other one is good.
It hits at 4, right? 4 times 3
Oh,
is
it's
12.
4. That's right. The other one was better. Thank you. All right, this one's better. All right.
This guy. There we go.
So we can buy 4. Okay, so we are now at a new point where we spend, we buy 24 apples when the price of apples was 50 cents. So there we go.
There's
I'm
our
going to hit
24.
our 50 cents right here.
Yep.
Right, about midway.
Yep.
$0.5 per apple, and you can mark the 24.
Yep, we got it right here. There's 24. Put it above there, and now we have.
And now you can see
Another
how
point.
the demand curve is shaping up. And now we can repeat this over and over again. I think we're gonna stop here, right?
Yeah, I think
just-
we're good. I think we're good. I think we have some more interesting things to say too.
Different prices for apples, same income and same price of cherries have led us to 3 points on the demand curve. And if we did this again and again, we eventually would have a lot of these budget lines moving like this, a lot of optimal choices, and finally we would be able to draw the demand curve.
I'm gonna start in the middle, I think, and I'm gonna connect.
Or you can start them really high.
All right, you're gonna.
Oh, you're good.
Fernando's gonna draw this. He's our artist.
I am not an artist. I wish.
Microeconomists are artists in some
There
way.
you go.
Oh, that's
You like
beautiful.
that?
Yeah, I do.
So this is the demand curve. All right. Now, this is not the only type of information that we can gain from this graph. There's more information that we can gain. And I don't know where you want to go with this. I have an idea.
Let's you're the resident microeconomist, so let's let the
All right.
microeconomist
I have a good idea. Notice that
think
what
about what we're
happened
doing
here.
here.
What happened here was we went from this price, which was 50 cents, to $1, right? And to $1.50. So the price of apples has gone up, going from here to here to here. And so far, the only thing we've analyzed is what happens to our demand for apples, which went from 24 to 12 to 6. And we haven't said anything about cherries. And so the question that you can ask yourself right now, well, is Are apples and cherries complements, substitutes? Do they go well together? Is it that you eat apples and then because you're eating more apples, you're going to eat less cherries? Meaning that they're substitutes. Can we answer that question with the information that we have so far?
So the information that we have are my preferences. And so we can look here and figure out how I feel about apples and cherries. So should we pick this point here
We
to
can.
start it out with?
I would go from this one to this one because this is going to be interesting. From this one to this one is not going to be that interesting.
Okay, yeah. So let's look at this point here. This was my optimal consumption bundle. If my optimal consumption bundle was 12 apples and 6 boxes of 12 apples and 4 boxes of cherries, if the price of apples was $1.
The price of apples was $1.
And
the consumption of cherries
was 4.
Cherries was 4 cherries.
Yep.
And
the consumption of apples,
the consumption of apples, which we've been analyzing,
is 12.
Is 12. And then
the price of apples rises to
$1.50. And
my consumption of cherries rises
to 5. So here's some information that's interesting. And just for completeness sake,
6.
That we already analyzed.
But
We've analyzed this change. But now we're going to analyze this one. So what does this say about Kara's preferences for apples and cherries?
So when the price of apples rises, I ended up purchasing more cherries.
More cherries. So are these complements or substitutes?
It looks like I'm shifting my consumption from apples to cherries. So these are substitutes. So I view apples and cherries as substitutes, which is a reasonable thing. They're both fruits. I could eat apples for breakfast or cherries for breakfast.
Now, somebody else could say, wait a minute, I like to eat them together. I like making fruit salad. Actually, I like making fruit salad. And I like to eat them together. So what would that say about me? Well, really what it would say about me is that those are not my preferences.
No, these are my indifference curves.
Those are her indifference curves, not mine. And so if I'm going to buy less cherries because the price of apples went up and now I'm less likely to want to have a fruit salad, then what I should be showing here is a different set of indifference curves that are actually consistent with that type of behavior. And so this is how the preferences and the budget lines interact together to show things about ourselves. And we all are different. We all have different preferences. And so naturally, our decisions are going to be different as well.
So now we can move away from this indifference map for now. And we could think about what might happen to this demand curve if there was a change in the price of cherries. We could do a change in the price of cherries here and find the optimal consumption bundle, but maybe we just wanted to talk about what direction might it go.
Just in general, yeah.
Just in general. Let's suppose the price of cherries rises.
Yeah.
Let's say the price of cherries rises. Now, price is no longer 3, so this is no longer relevant, so I'm going to stand in front of it. And we could go over here and use these indifference curves to answer this question. But if the price of cherries rises, and apples and cherries are substitutes, and I'll just write it here. And again, they're substitutes for me.
For her, not
because
for
I
me.
have these preferences. If apples and cherries are substitutes and the price of cherries rises, then I'm going to shift my consumption from cherries to apples. This demand curve is no longer the correct demand curve, because when we constructed this demand curve, price of cherries was $3. Price of cherries is something higher. So we have to move the entire demand curve. And which direction do we move it? So if I'm shifting from cherries to apples, if the price of apples is $1, I'm going to have higher demand at
any price.
At all
That's what
possible prices. And so this is the new demand curve. if the price of cherries rises.
Now, just to be clear, we were being very lazy here. We could have said, well, if the price of cherries goes up to, let's say, $6, we would have been able to draw the new budget lines where the price of cherries is $6 instead of $3. But we didn't because it would have looked really horrible in that graph.
And we're making a big enough mess in here.
Exactly. But what we would have found out, because her preferences are substitutes between cherries and apples, we would have found out eventually that the demand curve indeed shifts to the right. Right?
All right.
That's the point that I wanted to make.
Now, what about income?
All right.
What do we think about income? What if, let's suppose my income decreases? These better be normal goods.
I think they are. They look very normal.
So let's suppose my income decreases and my income is now, let's say my income is 16.
But let's still
No,
go with
15.
1.
15.
So
Let's return to the case where let's clean up our.
let's go back to the original one. This was the original one, right?
Yep.
And so if we can either increase the income or decrease it. If we increase it, you want 15.
Oh no, that's decrease.
Decrease it.
Yeah, let's decrease.
If we do it to 16, it'll be easier.
Well, 16 is
24?
not divisible by 3.
That's right.
But
15 is, but it's not by. 15 is fine. Yeah.
15 is fine.
All
We're
right,
going to drop
15
it. Drop
is fine.
income to 15.
And so now, if the income is 15 and the price of cherries is 3, we can buy up to 5 boxes of cherries. And if the income is 15 and the price of apples is 1, then we can buy up to 15 apples. And notice one thing, that between 8 and 24 and between 5 and 15, we're going to have the same slope.
And it looks pretty good.
It should
It
be
looks
very
pretty good.
parallel, right?
Yep,
Yes.
these are parallel lines.
And this one we're not talking about it. So, all right. And so now we have to make a decision. What are we going to buy? And, well, again, it seems like, I don't want to use green, it seems like the optimal decision is somewhere around here. Want to make it 6? Make it easy?
Well, we can, yeah, but it doesn't matter too much other than it's less than it was before, right?
Yes. Let's make it 6. I don't know how much we're going to have left for
A 3.
it's 3 something, right?
No, 6.
Oh, it's perfect. It's 3. Yeah. Wow. All right. So if it's 6, then we have 6 and 3, which is the optimal choice. Why is it the optimal choice? It's because this consumption bundle is on the highest possible indifference curve, which is not shown here, but I can draw it. And now we have that at a lower income level, if income went down from, 24 to 15,
24 to 15, we went
our consumption went from, what was the consumption? 12 to 6.
6.
And the consumption of cherries went from 4 to 3, right?
Yep, 4 to 3.
Okay, but it's not on the graph.
But we know they're both normal goods.
Mm-hmm.
Our consumption of each fell. And our demand curve
It's going to shift to the other.
shifts left at
And
all
again,
possible prices.
If you want to know exactly what the demand curve is going to look like, well, you would have to do the same thing. And for the new income level of 15, start moving the price of apples and observe what the optimal choices are, and then plot the optimal choice of apples in here as it relates to the price of apples. If we wanted to be precise, but we're very lazy today, and we're just going to draw a demand curve that shifts to the left.
More interested here in what direction things go. Okay, so we are doing really well. We have 1 viewer in our live session, and we have 25 more minutes. We've constructed a demand curve. We've talked about where indifference curves come from. We've shown how we find our optimal consumption bundle. I think there's probably only one thing left that we haven't talked about.
Which is, I don't remember.
Elasticity.
Oh, elasticities.
So
yes.
there's another piece of information that we get from this demand curve.
All right. let's use the one that we know.
Let's use the one
The
that we
original.
know. We know all these points, and we're gonna erase the hypothetical demand curves with different incomes and different prices, and we're gonna look at
Elasticities. Right.
elasticities.
So what is an elasticity? The thing that you have to keep in mind about elasticities is why they're useful. I think that's the most important thing here, is that when you're comparing different demand curves, let's say those of apples to those of cherries, or demand curves here in the US to demand curves in China, the units matter, the units of account, because the price is measured in, here in the US, would be measured in dollars per apple. And if we were to draw a demand curve in China, we would have to change it to, what's the currency in China? Yuans. Yuans, that's right. And so we wouldn't be able to compare changes in the price of apples here in the US to changes in the price of apples in China, because we'd have to convert all the time the currencies just to make sure that we're doing consistent comparisons. The thing about elasticities is that they don't have any units, because instead of measuring changes, absolute changes, like saying from $1 per unit to $1.50 per unit, you measure percentage changes. And so the question is, if the price went up from $1 per unit to $1.50, in absolute terms, it's 50 cents. But in percentage terms, that's 50%. And that can be compared to a change in the price of apples in China, if we're also measuring that change in China in percentage terms. And so this is the beauty of elasticities, is that it allows us to compare different demand curves in different places for different individuals and even for different goods, because we're always measuring things in terms of percentage changes. So let's try it out. Let's try out an elasticity when moving from this point right here, which is 12 units, 12 apples demanded at a price of 1, to 6 apples demanded at a price of 1.50.
All right. Here, so
okay.
This space
I'll
right
use
here.
that space. So the elasticity, the price elasticity of demand, is that the notation we were using? I don't remember.
I think so.
Okay. Will be the percentage change in quantity. So the percent, I'll write it like this. Percentage, that's percentage. That's going to mean change. And QA is my quantity of apples, divided by the percentage change in the price of apples. So this is what we have to calculate. So how do you calculate a percentage? Well, you take the absolute change in the quantity of apples and you divide by the original amount of apples that you had to get a percentage change. And that gets divided by the absolute change in the price of apples divided itself by the original price of apples. And so when we have that, we get our elasticity. So let's calculate it.
So we've got
have
-6, it looks
we
like.
have an absolute change of -6 in the quantity demanded of apples when the original amount was 12. And that has to be divided by the absolute change in price, which is 50 cents.
50 cents.
When the original price was 1. So this is going to be very, very clean. So -6 over 12 is -0.5. And 0.5 over 1 is just 0.5. And so we see that -0.5 divided by -0.5 is -1. So we have, I don't want to ruin your wall here, an elasticity of demand, a price elasticity of demand of -1. In this case, which is also,
That's lovely.
We didn't plan this.
So what is it? Let's interpret that. So that means that if this is my elasticity of demand for apples, if the price of apples rises by, let's say, 1%,
1%.
then the quantity demanded that I would demand of apples is going to decrease, so it's a negative number, and it's going to decrease by
the same 1%.
1%.
Now
Let's see.
that might change. I don't know if it will change here.
I don't know, because we could have done some really very Cobb Douglas types of preferences here, right?
Let's see. This is gonna move 50%.
50%.
And this is gonna go up 100. So it's
100,
gonna be
yeah.
different. It'll be different.
Yeah, well, maybe we should do that. Should we try that one?
Let's try that one.
Well, we got a few minutes left, so let's try it. And I'm gonna clean us up a space down here. So let's suppose.
So let's go from this one to this one.
So here to here. Our elasticity is going to be the change in the quantity of apples divided by the original quantity, all divided by the change in the quantity in the price of apples divided by the original price. Our change in quantity is we go from.
We got to put the P's here. Sorry, PA and.
Oh yes.
PA.
P. Thank you.
There you go.
This is why we didn't want to do peaches, right?
Exactly. So the change in the quantity of apples is from 24 to 12.
So
that's minus
negative
12.
And our initial one was 24.
Okay. Divided by
our change in price is
50
cents. From 50 cents to $1.
But the original was also
50 cents. That's good. So we've got negative 0.5 divided by 1. So we've got negative 0.5. It's not the same.
It's a different elasticity.
It's a different elasticity
so
from here to
you
here.
get a different interpretation. If you increase the price of apples by 1%, then it results in a decrease in the demand for apples of 0.5%. And that's the interpretation.
All right.
That's it.
Yeah, that's it. So I think we've done a lot here, Fernando.
Yeah,
I think we started
I
pretty
agree.
much at the beginning. At the beginning of the course, in week 1, we introduced the budget constraint. In week 2, we introduced the preferences. And then we also showed the optimal consumption bundle. In week 3, I think maybe
I think we did that. I don't remember
Well,
what week it was.
either way, as we move through week 2 and 3, we put preferences and budget constraints together to find optimal consumption bundles. We do a lot of studying how those things might change if something changes.
Yeah.
And then we use all of that information to construct our demand curve, talk about how demand curves might shift, and then elasticity. And if you are comfortable with all of the things that we've talked about here.
If everything made sense and you think you can replicate it, that means that you're on the right track.
Yeah.
And you're probably going to do very well in the exam.
Yeah.
So good luck.
All right.
And,
thank you for watching.
Thanks for watching.
And if you couldn't be here with us live, then this
Always
video is
click on it.
recorded.
Yep.
And watch it as many times as you want.
Have a good one.
Bye.
All right.